Clive, welcome on 𝗞𝗿𝗶₺. 𝗞𝗿𝗺 is our contrarian podcast, basically focused around interviewing people with lots of experience, people with, let's say, a story, and people with a lot of background into the gaming and the political arena, and what it takes to, let's say, do what they have done, as well as, what you think some general views are on what's happening in the world. So I'm really excited. We're going to talk specifically about Venezuela, gaming and emerging high-risk markets, but obviously I don't want to not touch the situation where we're in today with regards to what we call Gulf War III, right? So, yeah,
Well,
let's just start with, an introduction of yourself and basically how you got into the business. I mean, let's start with some extremely familiar subjects before we start hard hitting it with what I think is going to be very interesting.
first and foremost, many thanks for inviting me onto this forum. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a lot of people to understand and get insights to our industry that we've always been so passionate about. So I thank you very much for the opportunity. And also, it's a very interesting time that we're all going through. So I think the subject matter is apropos the timing that we're all going through. So as you say, I've spent many years, I think 4 decades now in this industry. I feel like the Lewis Hamilton of the gaming industry, I guess, although a few years older than he is. But I actually started out as an athlete in my earlier days and was studying sports science. I had an injury and I was consequently very miserable during that period where I couldn't be active and competing. And I was going through a lot of therapy. So I decided to work at night so I could get therapy during the day. And the option came up to work or train as a dealer, actually, in London, which is where I started. And as I think that happens to a lot of us, we get hooked very early on. So I got sort of romanticized by the industry to an extent. I was a young kid, working in the West End of London at night in a casino. It was fun time. It was a good period. It was in the late 70s, early 80s.
It paid well at that time, right?
It paid very well, and it was exciting. And so that was literally, my entree into the industry. My other passion aside from sport was to travel. So I decided to go further afield. I started with the cruise industry and worked literally on board the cruise ships for a while. And that took me around the world in a number of capacities. And I worked my way through the industry and went through the various levels, become manager, operations manager, kind of a global manager for a number of operators, and then got into the offshore short cruise business primarily in Florida.
Right.
And we operated 312 miles offshore, and then in Texas, in fact, even in New York. Then I finally decided to go back to land-based gaming, and because I had such a wanderlust and a sense for adventure. And at that time, I want us to remember the only 2 licensed jurisdictions in the US were really Atlantic City and Nevada.
Yeah, so the opportunities were quite limited, but going from the UK to Florida, that must have been, really exciting. So how long have you been in the business by now?
Well, I have to say, I think it's 45 years.
So 45 years. So, and before you started, let's say, initially in the casinos in the UK, how many years thereafter you went international? And then how many years after that before you started to go on your own?
Well, pretty much in the 80s was my cruise industry, wanderlust, walkabout or cruise about.
Right.
The next decade, I focused more on being physically based in Miami, operating the casinos for Norwegian Cruise Line as a concessionaire. And then the day's cruise business, I formed my own operating company during that period, sort of 2000s, sort of late 90s, 2000s. And in the 2000s was when I started to venture off internationally with my own management company.
We met in Russia. You had, let's say you started to undertake some, interesting projects there. But before that, you were already in Latin America. So maybe we can start with some of your Latin experiences, go to Russia, and then circle back to where you are today.
I started actually in Venezuela, interestingly enough.
That was the one after Florida.
Yeah, when I was based in Florida. Yeah, there were some opportunities that came across the table, and it was interesting because at that time there were not really operators who were interested to venture into these emerging markets. European companies were very focused in Europe and development there. US companies were so highly regulated and focused on US regulated markets, and frankly didn't have the interest or the experience to go further afield. So I went to Venezuela. I went to Maracaibo and partnered up with a 5-star hotel there, and we opened what then was a legal and licensed casino in a 5-star hotel. And actually, we were very successful. It wasn't overnight, but we were successful.
How did you find the funding for it? Did you take investors in, or was this something that, let's say, you coordinated with the hotel?
I coordinated with the hotel because at that time, the hotel owner, it was a family-run business. They were looking for overseas investment, but everybody was scared of going into Venezuela. There was then, not a lot of, I guess there were political risks associated and some potential volatility. So
yeah, and what are the political risks? Because it's like the length of the license. I mean, when you get a license in Venezuela at that time, and obviously, especially where we're going to go with this conversation, it is not easy, right? I mean, you really took some risk, but you took risk, that you thought was very calculated.
Yeah, I think, and we'll talk about this as we go through, risks are always, I believe, calculated. And the more one understands the regulatory environment or the political environment, the risk associated is easier to calculate. And I think I was quite fortunate of having traveled a lot previously and having dealt, even within the cruise industry, with very many different nationalities and different cultures. So it wasn't alien for me to, culturally, to go to Venezuela. The difficult thing was to get the confidence of the hotel owner and explain to him that he was not going to get traditional foreign financing. So we were able to work with suppliers. I had some credibility with suppliers. I'd worked with them a lot. So I leveraged my credibility with those suppliers, brought in experienced expat managers, and we basically built it up in a very small way, then cash flowed our way up into what became a pretty large size casino. We had ultimately ended up with 350 machines, 20 live table games, sports book, and so on. So, we grew organically from within.
Yeah, and that risk profile that you took on yourself with regards to going to suppliers, basically say to suppliers, hey, I got this interesting project in Venezuela, and then suppliers looking at you and basically thinking, okay, if I'm going to import equipment or export equipment to, Venezuela, how am I assured that, number one, you're going to be paying? Number two, my equipment is safe. Number three is what if, right? Payments don't occur, etc. So you must have dealt with this a number of times, right?
Yeah. It puts a lot of strain, not just on one individually, but on one's relationships when you want to sort of leverage assets and mortgages and so on to give personal guarantees. But this goes along with, the personal belief. If you believe something can work, of course, there are associated risk-reward elements that come into play. At that time, also, for a lot of suppliers, there weren't a huge amount of overseas opportunities. So I think they were a little bit more risk open or were prepared to roll with it a little bit.
But it took a certain type of personality in order to do so. I recall from a number of my experiences, I, was a supplier for many, many years before I also became an operator and back into the supply business. And it was always very, very, let's say, it was not, even if I believed in the project, and as you said, I got to, understand a lot of cultures, etc. It doesn't mean that the rest of the corporate, that you're somehow dependent upon in order to provide you with the equipment is thinking the same thing, right? No matter if you're part of the same organization or even for that matter, standing on top of it, you have financial guys, investors, and everybody else surrounding you.
Yeah, look, if I had $1 for every time somebody said within the organization or industry or investors, you are out of your mind. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
We would be, $1 richer every time. But look, I think it talks to the individuality of who we are, what we enjoy, what gives us satisfaction, what drives us. And the ability to leverage what our experiences are, and they're cumulative over time. But the first leap of faith, it's a leap into the unknown.
So from Venezuela, successful casino, what was next?
Russia. When I'd ventured into Russia on a couple of occasions, I had looked at some operations. I would have been invited in to consult or advise some groups actually out of the US, and they had not been successful because Russia was nothing like anything that anyone had experienced in the US. What I felt at that time was there was a huge opportunity for distribution of gaming equipment and machines, and we entered into a distribution.
Yeah, you were going to compete against me, I recall.
Yes, in a very noble and friendly way, of course. But yes,
absolutely. Well, and generally, competition is, pretty noble and friendly, and until it comes to the, hardcore negotiations. Yeah.
It's very healthy, and I think what happened in Russia to a great extent, there was a lot of collaboration amongst the expats. I think we all tried to help each other. We all shared a vision. We all shared the appetite for the risk. And we saw the potential, which was huge. So during that period of distribution, I literally came across a location that I could not resist from an operational point of view. So I approached the owner of the hotel and gave him a suggestion of what I thought he could do with an enormous empty space that he had. And that's when I knew I could sell. I could sell better the concept than the machines to him. And he liked the concept, the idea. I brought him to the States. We did a walkabout. He saw the concept because I wanted to do something that hadn't been previously done in Moscow. Because at that time they were private, really small private European style casinos, very heavily focused on table games, very few machines. So the idea was to build a mini gaming complex, with a lot of machines, a lot of live table, a lot of entertainment, a lot of F&B offer. So I took again that experience that I drew from the cruise ships, from living in the States, and applied it to Moscow.
And actually worked really well in Moscow. Russians are very open to that type of lifestyle.
Absolutely were, and it was as you remember, it was an incredible period of time where the Russian, I think, market was very, very open, was hungry to get new ideas, new products. Staff were very interested to learn and get into new careers. So I think it was really literally a perfect storm.
True. I mean, from a regulatory perspective, this was quite easy because the taxation was low, because it was basically a per machine and per table charge on a monthly basis. And additionally, you had the advantages of, let's say, the government not being heavily involved. And once you paid your taxes, you didn't even have corporate tax anymore. So obviously it became very, very lucrative for the operator, and simultaneously became very interesting for a lot of the employees, right? Until, the market closed as a whole. But starting to look at the Russian market and the political risks, I mean, some interesting situations there. How did you feel about those risks?
At the beginning, they were different risks. I didn't consider the actual political risk being one that at that time was of great concern. I think there was just a perception that Moscow was a complicated, dangerous place to be, and that you had to deal with a lot of elements. In my experience, it was always about who one chose to deal with, and how you dealt with Russians. I have and still have tremendous relationships and friendships with Russians that I dealt with and had business with or became friends. Word meant everything. A handshake.
Yeah,
My best deal was written on a piece of paper and
yeah,
put in a safe. And that lasted
yeah.
for many, many, many years. There was for me, a code of honor that existed that it's kind of hard to explain to people. I think people dramatize or romanticize, all the negative elements. I saw and still remember the
Yeah.
positive side of that experience. A handshake was worth a handshake.
Right. When everything goes well and Russians are dependent upon you, etc., they do really well. They're very collaborative, etc., work with you and help you along the way, very much so. But when the situations get tough, they always say the Russians are tougher. Is that,
Yeah, that's true.
isn't that something that, we all experience to a certain degree? I'd imagine, how did you, because you were heavily involved in Russia, nice large operation, and then suddenly you got all the limitations coming out of, what Putin started to rule about. How would you describe that period?
It was sad to be, that's the word I would use, because there was so much time and effort put into building that project. There was a vision, there was the effort that went into hiring and training and building a really, really good, solid workforce. I'd never thought that Putin would actually close the casinos. With the industry was given some notice,
Yeah.
and I figured at the last minute it would
Yeah.
never actually happen. So I think I was in denial for a lot of that period of time, and of course hugely disappointed. But one learns very quickly that you are not going to win that fight if you try to go against the government, least of all in Russia. So I decided that I just had to leave with great memories and move along. There is no choice.
So after Russia, what was next?
Mexico.
Not an easy market either.
Yeah, out of the frying pan into the fire, as we say. So again, it was also a little Wild West. It was at the time when new licenses were being issued. There were some 30 plus licenses that were on offer, each one different from the other. Most of them were issued along political favor lines. Many of the license holders at the time were not operators. So there were opportunities at that time to partner up with a license holder or operate under somebody else's license. So that was the structure and the strategy.
And I mean, so much has happened in Mexico. The casino that was set on fire. Let's say the influence of the cartels, the influence of, let's say, the strong elements in Mexico, etc. And funny enough, were they really part of the casino business or not? Because for the most part, casinos aren't that interesting to criminality. Yeah? So maybe you can, give me a bit of your view on that. Then we can discuss that.
I would say, and I know a large number of license holders and a large number of operators who are very credible, very legit. And I think there is no issue for me in that respect that cartels are directly involved. But the situation with cartels is also pervasive in Mexico that it's almost impossible not to have some sort of impact from whatever activities are going on, particularly in the northern part of Mexico. One's got to understand a little bit of the geography of Mexico to understand, where the concentration of those activities are and where the risks are. So most of that concentration of narco activity is along the border with the US. So, if one was smart, don't go there. So I spent most of my time in Monterrey, which is a very vibrant market, and then Mexico City.
It's a great city. I mean, I was very impressed with the city.
And other than, and this was a big issue, the casino that caught fire or was set on fire, we didn't see any direct influence. What happened behind the scenes, I can't really speak to, and I think it's something to mention. It's important as foreigners as we go into another country. It's about survival and being smart and understanding the risks. I think it's more about survival and risk assessment than marketing sometimes. You just got to keep your head down and not get involved and just stay focused on the job at hand. And I think if one does that, very rarely one gets into deep water or trouble.
Yeah, because I mean, in all honesty, the casino business is a real business. It's yes, you can make money if you know what you're doing, but you can really lose money if somehow things are turning against you, or you don't get the number of customers, or somehow you have winning streaks against you, etc. It's not, let's say, a guaranteed moneymaker, is it?
No, it's not. And unfortunately, a lot of newcomers to the industry don't understand that. So I think this happened, not just Mexico or even Russia, in every new market that opens. Those that get access to licenses and open who don't have experience think it's a license to print money. And when the word volatility didn't exist in their vocabulary when they opened. And so that's where the difficult part was discussing these issues before they happened, so that there was an adjustment of expectation. There was some reality checks and a good enough relationship to explain what happened, how it happened, why it happened, in the event that we had, the swings and the volatility. And for the most part, again, it comes down to trust and explaining that this was accepted. But there was a learning curve.
But it's interesting, because most of the people that enter the gaming business are quite strong in their ego, quite strong, and let's say in general, they already had some success, right? So, and then, this is just another business, but it really is not just another business, is it?
Sure, and I think that applies both sides. Certainly those who have been successful in politics or in other businesses, they think they're transferable skills, and our industry is very specific and very unique. I think also within our own industry, we sometimes think, well, I was successful over here, therefore I can be successful over there. And
right.
Each market is so different. Culturally, it's so different. And so I think, being astute and humble very key attributes if you're gonna take the venture to go overseas. Certainly in those early days.
So during the time in Mexico, online gaming was already there or not yet?
No, at that time, no. It was early days. Sports betting, yes. Sports betting actually was the precursor to live casinos. Caliente had been a major player for many, many, many years with a lot of retail outlets in sports betting. So
Right.
that was really
So at that moment, you didn't really touch it. What happened after Mexico, or why did you leave Mexico?
Well, this was one of those unfortunate situations where I was operating under a sub-license or as a sub-license, and the master license holder had some issues with, I would say they were more political issues. And the way that the licensing structure was, there's a master license, let's call it an umbrella, if you will, and from there could be as many as 80 sub-licenses. They're really not sub-licenses, but permissions that allow you to operate. Some licenses may have had 20, some more. But if something affects the master license at a sub-license level, it can have an effect across the whole spectrum of each and every license that's being operated under that parent master license. So, I got caught up in that. I had 4 operations, as they say, clausurado, closed. And to this day, they've not been reopened. So, that's, as I say, the risk reward. Sometimes.
And again, if you look at it from a political perspective, was this something, between political parties? Was this something that was justified? Was this something, because that's always the issue with gaming, right? Gaming is, it's a privilege, as I will keep on repeating, So how do you feel, this was to be, let's say, how did you see this? In which, let's say, interpretation, did you put it with regards to, lessons learned?
Well, in the case of Mexico, it's probably the most complex market at every level I see, because you have so many levels of administration, of course, at federal level, state level, municipal level. And one needs to be really, really attentive and careful at each of those levels. There's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork. And I think the attention to detail at each and every one of those levels is so key. There's so many permits that one needs, and it's quite often the smallest and the least expensive permit that you can't get. And right. If you can't get that permit, you can't open. And if you think
and this is basically where the challenge is coming with regards to which hands do you have to grease in order to make it happen.
Unfortunately.
So. After Mexico?
Well, I haven't shut the door completely on Mexico yet, so I still would look at other avenues and opportunities. I believe the Mexican market is matured a lot. I like it a lot. I think there are some very serious, very capable operators. I think the 𝗖𝗀𝗶 is much clearer now in terms of how it regulates the market.
Yeah, 𝗖𝗀𝗶, for the listeners, to be clear, that's the regulator. The Mexican regulator.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think the market is somewhat saturated. Online there were huge opportunities. That market is also a little crowded. So I think there are still some niches to be worked in Mexico. But then several years ago, I decided to go back full circle to Venezuela. So 3 years ago, more plus or minus, the government decided to allow casinos to reopen in selective cities and areas. Those licenses were also very selective in terms of who and where they were allocated. So I, together with a fellow European, were able to find a great location in Caracas. And we were able to lobby over a long period of time, together with a local partner, to get issued a license. It took pretty much 2 years to do that.
Wow.
A lot of patience.
And how did the government at that time, under Maduro, still look at it with regards to, why casinos could be okay for Venezuela to have? Is it because of foreign currency exchanges, tourism attraction? There wasn't much tourism, let's be honest. What was going through their mind to basically say this is okay?
I honestly don't think either of those or any of those issues went through their minds. I think there was just a demand from some interested parties that wanted to open casinos. I don't think the government looked at it as a massive source of tax or income generation. There wasn't really the infrastructure to develop tourism. So I don't think it was really seen then as a catalyst to help tourism. I think it was more to facilitate, friends with favors and so on. I think, and there, having said that, there were and still are some very credible operators that came from the previous period when casinos were operating. And so those groups were still exist, and they came back to the market. So I think there was a mixture of groups that had, or they're really individuals that had developed companies that were also still in the hospitality sector that had enough credibility historically to be able to, and knowledge to come back into the market. So I think there was a balance of the two. two sides of that coin.
Right. Because casinos often are, for, let's say, the more, call it well-to-do, or the people that like to, make a bet. It's not just about the gamblers. It's really very much about the entertainment, right? And the safety of the environment that a casino provides for a lot of people, right?
100%. So before, Venezuela was primarily a bingo market because it was a social game. The target market, I would say, was female,
small stakes,
25, mid-20s to 60. It was really a social club, a gathering place that was safe, as you say. So Venezuela was always considered less than, ideal from a security and safety perspective. So where there were installations that were safe, and Venezuelans are such lovely people, they're so happy to please. So as long as one gave good service and attention and it was a safe environment, then they came on a regular basis. So it was a high volume, low risk, low volatility market for slot machines and bingo. There was the market that I entered into at that time, few full-on casinos, and these were limited to 5-star hotels.
Interesting. So the changes, I mean, they're massive. You're in the midst of it. Are you running your casino now? Is it open?
Yeah, we opened in June.
You opened in June. January, United States, took out Maduro. Did that make a difference? Did you stop operating? You continued? How did that work?
So, of course, it was a shock and surprise to everybody. So we closed for 48 hours. Everybody hunkered down. The main priority was, just making sure everybody was safe, the staff was safe, everybody got out, got home, because, the city was in a state of shock and turmoil. We had already set up a contingency plan in the event that something may occur, whatever that something was. But we had already planned for some contingency. So,
well, I'd imagine that you had to do in every country, right?
Yeah.
From Russia, Mexico to now Venezuela. So a bit of experience.
Yeah, kind of become an expert in the plan B through Z of how to get out of Dodge and get your staff home safely. So we closed for 48 hours. Okay. The following weeks were very quiet. Very quiet. Nobody was out in the streets. Nobody was sure what was going to happen. So for the rest of January, it was very, very, very quiet. February, it started to slowly pick up. I would say right now we're almost at previous levels of daily headcounts.
Oh wow, that's great. Okay, so what is your personal interpretation of, let's say, what's happening now? America basically decided to somewhat be more involved in, let's say, call it the oil economics of Venezuela. What I'd like to hear some insights of you being with your ear on the ground. What is changing? What has changed? And what is not changing?
I mean, obviously, it's a big issue, and I think as we follow news daily. I mean, I live in the States. I live in Miami, so I'm sort of in the epicenter of what's happening here within the US, what's happening geopolitically in this hemisphere, if you will. And we've heard Trump talk about the Monroe Doctrine on many occasions. So one can look at Venezuela in isolation, or you look at it as part of the overall geopolitical move, which I think it is. I think strategically Venezuela has always been very, very important because of the geography, the resources it has, the proximity to the US market. Oil, of course, everybody knows it has the largest oil reserves of any country. There's a very strong physical presence also, and financial presence of Chinese and Russian. The largest foreign national debt is to Russia for gas. So I think for the US, there are a number of reasons why it was prudent to make a move. Do I have the crystal balls? What will happen? I think things will stabilize more. I have to say that I think most people thought there would be a radical shift immediately to the opposition. I think the transition to Delcy Rodriguez is kind of smart. She's a very, very smart lady, in my opinion. She's very stable, solid. And so I think this interim period, there's been the ability to create some stability. And so
Right.
I think this period, however long that lasts for, in terms of transitioning, what would that mean? What would it look like? I would imagine, and I think this is what's being discussed, is there will be elections at some point in the future. Who knows when that will be?
Yeah.
Will it be within this year?
Okay.
And I think that's where you'll see a shift. It's probably of the baton changing hands.
So you think Venezuela will soften, and will basically slowly get back on track, by improving its economy, by basically lifting some of the restrictions and, basically hopefully throw out a lot of the policies that really didn't work.
When there's any regime change, you have to be pragmatic. And Venezuela needs to produce cash. So the economy needs to be stimulated. Before they can rebuild democracy, they need to develop revenues and create revenues. So I think part of that it's really as much a macroeconomic issue as it is a political issue. And I think the US in this respect is pragmatic, and I think the current administration is pragmatic, and I think the opposition in Venezuela is pragmatic. So if we follow that logic, there ought to be stability.
Okay, so obviously you can't predict, but if you would have to predict, would you believe that the opposition will get back into power after, let's say, up in an election, or will she be able to really, really improve, let's say, the economy, let's say, bettering the lives of the people in general, making it therefore a viable option?
Look, I think if one follows the polls, public opinion, then they would suggest that the opposition would win an election if it was held today. Okay, that's not Clive saying this is what public polls and opinion would tell us. Do I think things will change? For sure, because first of all, it'd be hard for them to get much worse than they were. Two, the issue is you need stability, and the only way that direct foreign investment is going to happen into Venezuela, which the country needs, if there's political stability. They've got to stabilize currency. They've got to have an effective banking system. They need to have a legal framework that works. There's got to be a way to,
because all of that was pretty broken, eh? Or is pretty broken.
Yeah, so it's all that infrastructure has got to be rebuilt. So I think, and this is where I say, trying to sort of remain apolitical, I think that Delcy Rodriguez has that capability actually to do this. And I think the opposition for sure has the capability to do this. So I think either way, it should happen. I believe it will happen. I think if the US lends weight and facilitates support and encourages foreign investment, then I think it could be a great opportunity.
Yeah, that will move a lot faster. Yeah, exactly. And how will that influence your plans in Venezuela? Not just with your present property, but maybe some additional ambitions.
Yeah, I believe Venezuela it has tremendous opportunities. I've spent so many years there, not only in gaming, but also, as everybody talks about oil, that's the obvious, but we're talking a long time and $1 billion of investment. Venezuela has huge other natural resources. I think the biggest opportunity for folk in our sector of the industry is tourism. Massive opportunity to redevelop infrastructure for tourism, hotels, etc., which I think will bring a lot of foreigners back. So they need to develop infrastructure with the airports. Airlines have to have the confidence to fly back in.
Or a lot of Venezuelans back, right? Because so many left.
Well, 8 million left. So If half of those go back, that will re-stimulate the economy. But they need to go back to jobs. So to create jobs, you need that direct foreign investment, and so on and so forth. So,
well, because casinos create a lot of employment really quick.
well, that's the great thing. Casinos provide hard currency, provide taxes, and they provide employment. So these are two things. And I think there will be also development with the online sector and digital gaming.
Right.
So I think that
how high are the taxes in Venezuela?
It's
because again, clarity for the listeners. Land-based casinos get taxed over gross income, in addition to corporate tax. What is the GGR tax?
It is an incredibly complex structure that I would be boring.
I wouldn't expect that.
I hired an Ernst accountant to work internally for us over there.
Okay.
It's very complicated, but to keep it simple, it's probably a weighted average of 30%.
Okay.
But so it's not terrible, it's livable.
Not exactly, not definitely not the lowest, but definitely not the highest.
And I have to say right now, the Gaming Commission are really helpful and collaborative. It's not a hostile environment.
And how many casinos are there at the moment in Venezuela?
Plus or minus 30.
And we talk about how many people now? Because, it was 27 million before they left? -8, or is it not that low?
Well, there's ebbs and flows. I think right now, the last numbers were around 24 million.
Okay.
But a large chunk of that is Caracas. I mean, Caracas is the most densely populated.
And you primarily have, as you said, there's no online gaming yet. So primarily it's just land-based casinos? That's it at this stage?
Primarily. There are online gaming casinos. There were a lot of grey operators for many years with overseas.
That's clear, like anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Now they are beginning to issue licenses, so I think this will also bring change. So I have a lot of positive feeling about the next 5 years. It's not going to change overnight.
Right.
Although actually gaming tends to respond very quickly because we're quick to move and we generate hard currency quickly.
Yeah.
And Venezuela in this respect has always been unique. Venezuelans, they love to do everything to extreme. At one time they were the highest consumption per capita of whiskey in the world. I think they lost that title to Japan a few years ago. But before, in the previous era when I was there, our revenues per machine, per table, by every metric, were as high as anywhere else in Latin America, other than perhaps Argentina, where there was more of a monopoly by province. So,
but that's because of the limitations. Yeah.
So the culture's there.
So some general remarks. What do you feel? Where, let's say, some of the most positive or negative experiences during your career? I mean, it's, we've heard quite a bit of, let's say, what you have experienced. And how would you look at it if you sit down at night with whiskey in your hands and say, like, this was really good, or that was really bad?
Well, it's interesting because it won't surprise you that I've actually done that once or twice. I think there are times in our career when you think, should I turn right? Should I turn left? I was always going to go the route of the adventure, the dynamic, the risk reward, because that, for whatever reason, is in my nature. Maybe it comes back to my sporting background. I don't know. But I like that competitiveness of doing something that's challenging.
Right.
So the most rewarding thing for me, I think, was being able to go to markets that were complicated and achieve something there. Venezuela at the very beginning. I'd like to think I can recreate that again now. Russia for me was the most challenging, the most rewarding, for similar reasons. It was very competitive. It was a cultural experience. But I think more than anything for me about the satisfaction is when you build something from zero and you have a vision and you start with a drawing and then you see it come to fruition and then you build it, and the staffing and the creating the culture, So for me as a Brit to end up being in Venezuela, creating a culture of gaming there, going to Russia, creating a culture for employees, and many years later seeing some of these same faces who are now in management, who are Russian, who are Venezuelan, I think this gives me the most immense satisfaction that there's sort of a legacy there of giving a career to folk that, you know, we were fortunate. We grew up in an era where the opportunities were a little bit easier.
Exactly. We were like mentors to a lot of people, right? And that's one of the things that I always feel very proud of, is that, you know, a lot of people that have worked with me, you know, over the years have done extremely well. And, you know, it makes me very proud of, let's say, having been part of that initial stage of their career.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. That gives me the most satisfaction. The most disappointing, I think, is the same issue, to have worked so hard and then have the rug pulled under your feet through no fault of your own, but because of, you know, a change of, you know, politics.
That's a risk reward, but also, as you said, the adventurism, right? It's about the journey. It's not about the end result, right? And that keeps us going.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when you look at, you know, let's say the changes in the world of gaming, you know, over the 40 years, what would be some of the most prevalent, you know, changes that you would highlight?
Technology, without a doubt. When I started, gaming was pretty basic. You know, you had your live table games, and, you know, slots were few and far between.
So yeah, technology and what would you say, you know, how will that impact, let's say, the next couple of years? How will AI impact? Do you have any quick?
Yeah, I think, look, with all things technology, obviously we have online gaming, digital gaming. I think at some points there will be some convergence. You know, there'll be some bridge and crossover from all these different verticals of gaming. They exist already, of course. You know, we have large companies have brands, and they transfer their players from one product to another. AI, I think, can be a great management tool. Of course, you know, we all use it. I think we still have to. This is what I'm trying to create a program. Not trying. I am creating a program now for staff, where we have to retain, I believe, the ability to be the critical thinker. You know, you hand that baton over to AI, and you know, you're just competing with everybody else that's done the same thing.
Right.
So I think we have to leverage that experience of having critical thinking abilities to be able to use AI. But I think we always have to remember, you know, the personal element. There's always a player. There's always a person at the end of our process. You know, whether it's in live gaming, whether it's online, whether it's digital, there's still that personal. There's still somebody.
Yeah.
And I think there's a balancing act here with how we employ AI to be an effective management tool, to give us good analysis. But I think the key is going to be how we retain that personal touch. And I see this a lot. And I think that's where hopefully some of these decades of experience can still apply in the digital age. You know?
I'm quite interested how AI is going to actually get more people to the casino and not less, or how AI is, let's say, is freeing up time for people, and how, you know, the players are going to have their own interpretation with regards to how they think that AI is able to influence their odds. So, you know, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see, you know, how those developments will occur, right? Because, you know, as we both know, out of experience, etc., you know, players always, well, not all, but some players always try to get an edge, right, onto the house. And it's going to be interesting to see how we have to react.
It will be. But if you remember, I don't know if there was a book written by a guy called Ken Houston, which was to How to Beat the Casino. It was card counting. And
Yes.
And this was the best thing that ever happened to us, because everybody wanted to come in and try it, because everybody thought they had the edge. So I think bring it on. It's great. You know, it's, you know.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got to stay positive.
Anything you ever were conflicted about within our industry?
You know, I think as within industries, there's sometimes a bit of hypocrisy, you know, that that creeps in. But no, I think the industry's lack of ability to have been able to educate non-industry people of how the industry works and the benefits that the industry have created. We're not always the evil that I think that, people have painted. We shouldn't feel that we're the enemy or we're the bad guys. We do a lot of good things for, it depends on, how you use the revenue streams. But I can say in the emerging markets that I've been in, we always give back way, way more than we take. So I'd like to see more of that happen.
Anything that you feel, is a message from your side that you would like the listeners to really pick up on?
There's so much. It's so exciting. Even after my 40 years, I still get super excited about, what may happen. Every time there's a political issue, there's an opportunity. Where there's a new technology, there's an opportunity. And I think to someone coming into the industry, I think one's got to retain an open mind and really look into some of the narrow niches and some of the, don't follow always the mainstream.
Right.
You got to understand where the mainstream's going.
Yeah.
But look, be your own person, be your own company, find your niche. Because when you're a small operator, you have no choice.
Absolutely. Well, it was fun having this conversation with you, Clyde. I am wishing you all of the best with regards to the Venezuelan operation and, hopefully, your ability to get Mexico back up and running and in general to, be able to express more. I think this was a good first call. I'd like to invite you sometime back in the future. And I'd like to really get that deep feel about, let's say, high risk emerging markets that has attracted you so much. And how, let's say that impacted, not only you, your career, but also those countries and let's say, the facilities that you basically brought to life and how that, made a difference.
Look, I'd be more than happy anytime. I think the forum's great, as I started the session by saying, and it's nice to share. It's not about, what necessarily I have done or believe that I've done. I think it's about trying to share an experience and try to motivate and enlighten, whether it's new guys coming into the industry or to enlighten those that are established in certain niches of the industry. There's nothing wrong in sharing. And I think this is a great, great thing. And over these years, I have more stories than there is whiskey, I think.
Fantastic. Let's hear some more of that in the future. Thank you very much, Clyde. Really appreciate it. And look forward then to the next one. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
𝗞𝗿𝗃 brings candid conversations with leaders and experts shaping gaming's political and regulatory future. Follow or visit 𝗞𝗿𝗃.com for more episodes and updates.